Welcome back to the Mama Judy and Jill podcast. Hi, I'm Jill, and I'm so glad that you're here with us. Hi, Mama Judy.
Hi, Jill. Good to see you again.
You too. Well, today we wanted to talk about establishing your artistic environment. And before we get there, Mama Judy, what are you working on this week?
This week I actually was doing I bought a sketchbook because I forgot to bring one. And I've been doing some wonky animals.
Ooh, yes, I saw you posted on Instagram the other day. It's so fun.
They've been so fun. I think I explained one time, Jill, I don't need to do any of this, but I want to strengthen my sketching and get beyond perfection. So what I'm trying to do is be real loosey-goosey, fun little animals, lots of color, lots of mark, and it's been great. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, I love that. One of our listeners wrote out and sent a message to us, and her name's Alyssa. And she said that by listening to, I think it was the first or second episode of ours, she said she was inspired to get back into doodling, which she hadn't done for a long time. And she doodled an octopus. And she actually sent me a picture, which I want to share with you. And she told me I could share it with anybody. But anyway, I just thought that was so cool, the idea of the doodling and that sort of thing.
I love doodling. Yeah. And have always been a doodler like most people. There are a lot of listeners out there that probably doodled on the edges of paper all their life, but they never thought that was connected to art.
Right. And it is so artistic. Well, okay. So, and I'll just tell you real quick what I'm working on. This is a fun thing this week, what I'm working on. I went down to the little local craft place and got a felting tool. It has these sharp little needles. There's actually 3 or 4 in this little tool that I bought. It looks like you're holding a pen, but it has these sharp things, and it's a felting tool. And some people create like felted wool animals and different things. But what I'm using it for is I was inspired by a woman that I follow on YouTube. I think her name is Tracy. But anyway, she does some really cool art videos and stuff. And I saw her taking fabric and using this tool to kind of get the fabric poked in there and then doing some stitching over it. So what I did is I took some silk pieces. I had a piece of linen, a 5x5 piece of linen, had put some silk pieces over it, just started stabbing it across, and it kind of puckers the fabric down in. And then I could slow stitch, but it made these really cool textures and designs. And it was so fun, beyond the fact that I got so excited about poking and I made myself bleed. I like snagged right into my hand.
I know. Actually, I was thinking, gosh, what a great tool. If you're ever angry, you could just take that anger to your art and just kind of pound things.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's get started. We're talking today about establishing an artistic environment. And first of all, let's start off. What do you think? Why is it important for us, or anybody doing art? Why is it important to establish some sort of environment for us?
I think what it does, Jill, is it lets our imagination and our brain know, okay, we're going to be doing art now. It's almost like a clue or a cue to our imagination. Okay, this is where we do our work. And I want to make just a real quick differentiation between the ritual that we're talking about of setting up an art environment and a routine. So at some point, I'd like to make a differentiation. But the ritual, it just helps you get ready for your art. And if you I've heard different artists use the word sacred space. It's a sacred space. It's an environment you can go into that you feel safe, that you have wonderful objects that mean a lot to you. And it sets the tone to begin your art practice.
That is a beautiful thing too. And when you said the safety, that sacred space, because for some people that might be the thing that they really need, whereas other people could probably just jump in anywhere, but to have a sacred, safe place like that, it just makes it feel so much more special.
It is. Special is another word. This is your space. This is your special space. Doesn't belong to anybody else. It may be in the middle of the living room, but it belongs to you and you can let people into it or not.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to get into some ideas that you and I both have in a little bit about what that might look like, some ideas, because
Right.
you listening may have a little space that you set up. You may love it. You may not like it. You may feel like, I've been thinking I want to change it up or something. So hopefully some ideas that we will give you will inspire you for your own space. But tell us about that distinction that you wanted to make first, Mama Judy, about routine and what was the other word? Ritual.
Ritual. They kind of go back and forth, but the routine is often what people will set up where I only do my art from 10 to 11.
Okay.
That is a routine that they get into. We all have routines. I
Mhm.
get up and have 2 cups of coffee. That's my morning routine.
Mhm.
Remember that routines, there's 2 things about routines. They're safe and they're easy. And whether we like it or not, the brain is a lazy muscle. If
Mhm.
you're learning something new, it takes a lot of energy. A routine is when you've done something so much, you don't even have to expend a lot of energy. When I go in and I sit down to do my mixed media and I do my routine with the papers and stuff, it's a no-brainer. There's reason for that expression. A no-brainer means I don't have to think about it.
Yes.
So part of what we want to make our art practice easier is enough routine that we'll go back to it every day.
Mm.
The other part, the ritual, can be
Can I
something.
say one thing about that,
Yes.
Mama Judy, just to tie in before you get a ritual? That makes sense because I hear even like, let's just say you're a runner, you go jogging
Mhm.
outside. People say for your routine, just the fact that you lay out your shoes and your running shorts or whatever beforehand so that you're not going, oh, where's my shoes or where's my clean socks? You don't have to think about it. So it's the same no matter what, if it's an art thing or an exercise thing, setting up your toothbrush in the same place and making sure your toothpaste is right there. If you had to go hunt it every time, you're breaking that routine.
That's right. And
Okay.
you're causing yourself more work. So the routine in the art helps you with establishing an art practice consistency. Because once you get a routine down, you're more apt to go do it. It's easy. You don't have to think about it.
Right.
The only thing I caution is don't let a routine limit you, but that's for another podcast. And
Okay.
a ritual kind of goes into what we want to talk about, which is setting up your environment.
Mhm.
A ritual can be any little thing that you do to start your art practice.
Okay.
And I'll give you an example from a class that I took by a woman who is also a shamanic therapist. She does what she calls sacred circles. Her ritual before she begins a painting is to just draw what she calls and feels as a sacred circle with a word or two of intention for her practice that day.
Hmm.
That is a ritual that she goes through before she starts her paintings.
Mhm.
So those are the 2 that I wanted to just make sure we're a little clarification on.
Yes. And when we talk about maybe how setting up your space, some stuff is going to potentially be more ritualistic feeling, and some of it's
Yes.
going to be, this stuff is going to help you stick to that routine. The things that we're
Yes.
talking about, it might not feel like a ritual, but it's definitely something to, so we're going to kind of touch on both. So I'm so glad you made that distinction.
Yes. And let's talk about the space that people set up to do their art in. Last time we talked about the fact that we go off for the summer, so I don't have my normal space.
Mhm.
But I bring certain things with me that I like to have in my space.
Mhm.
And these are not things that I use in my art. These are objects. I have a large crystal that I carry with me,
Mm.
amethyst crystal. I like to have that. I like the energy of an amethyst crystal. I carry a scent, what do you call it when you sage a room with sage? Normally that clears out all bad energy. Well, I have one that I buy from a wonderful company up in the Bay Area called Sage Organics. And I spray, my ritual is to spray my art space. It creates an olfactory smell that I just love. And I now associate that smell with beginning the daily practice.
Oh, so you do that not just when Mama Judy was just saying when they're traveling. So she and my dad are traveling during the summer for months on end. So you don't just do it when you first come into a house and set up your space. You do it each day that you come into your art space and sort of do that ritual.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I love that. I didn't know you
And
did.
then the other ritual that I have is kind of a silent one. I'll pick a word or two, maybe, or just the phrase, what do I want to do today? In fact, I have often asked myself, what do you want to do with your art today? And I might hear the word play. So I know that day all we're going to do is play. I might hear the word intention. That focuses me more on what I'm putting on the paper. There's an intention behind what I put on the page, just so scraps of paper. So those are the things that I have found that I can do, that I can take with me.
Yes.
And at home, I have other objects that are important to me. But again, trying to limit myself with what I carry.
Right.
But I always have some little, here we go, routine ritual that I do in my head for myself when I begin to do my practice each day.
Right. One thing I have sitting in my area or wherever I around the house is I like to light a candle a lot of times, especially because my routine is to do stitching specifically in the morning as a meditative process. And then I stitch for fun other times too. But it is my routine is to get up and I do a number of things, and stitching is part of that, lighting a candle. So it's like my ritual is that, and I've got the routine all intertwined.
Yes, I can't be trusted with live candles, so I had to quit. I would walk off and leave them and, come back 3 hours later and they're burnt down. So I don't get to bring a candle with me. That's why I do the spray. I can't burn anything down. But candles are wonderful.
Yes.
Rocks that you find. Maybe you find a rock somewhere that is in the shape of a heart. That can be one of your ritual items that you have there on your creative space.
Yes. And I think too, a ritual, one thing that I'll do too is I remind myself to breathe.
Yes.
Take a deep breath in and out. And I say a little prayer, but that is just to kind of center myself and ground myself. But just remind yourself to breathe, because sometimes, you're like,
you
I
don't
feel like I haven't really been breathing deep lately,
That's right. And music is another part of what I love, especially when I'm home, where I can go into the little creative office space and I can put my iPhone on what music I feel that day is inspiring. So I think music is a very important part. Candles, scents. I talked about my Paleo Santo scent spray, but somebody might love the smell of gardenias. Well, if you find a spray that has that, these are all things that either visually, tactilely, or olfactory start your senses working. And we want to bring all our senses to our art.
Yes.
And then I really do love the idea of writing, especially, I don't do it on every single page where I'm collaging, but if I'm going to sketch or I'm going to paint, I love to write a word or two on the background. And then you work right over the top of those words.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start doing, even just sitting down and kind of having a word. I'm going to try that over the next week and see how that feels. But I really like that, to just set the intention for that time or for the day or whatever it might be. And just to even say it in your head to yourself. I love that idea.
Well, it kind of gives you direction.
Yeah.
On one hand, you're listening to yourself. You're listening. For example, what I mean by that is let's say that I sit down and, oh my gosh, I am going to make the world's best painting today. Well, that may not be the state I'm in. So if I start out with asking my inner child, what is it we want to do today? I can get a clue if I listen what I should focus on for that day. You might get the word color. Well, then maybe that day, if I'm painting, I use colors that I normally would not use. Or I might get something else that I don't know what that means, but if I listen to it, it's coming from that part of us that we cannot see. So I love talking to myself before I start on anything adventuresome.
Yeah. And I've noticed a lot of the folks that, and we follow a lot of the same people on Instagram that stitch in or include in words in the work that they're doing: resilience, bravery, peace,
Yes.
words like that. It's the same thing. Like, I wonder if they're sitting down thinking that, and then that they incorporate that into the actual art that comes out that you can actually read because they've stitched it out or painted it or whatever. And I've seen a lot of that lately, and I think that's really powerful.
I do too. And for those people that are in, let's say, something like a stitching or a knitting or even a quilting, where you can't put those words into your particular art, that doesn't mean you can't use those words, because you can have a notepad right there and you just write out that word. So you can have it invisibly in your art.
Yes. And it would be fun to write it down on a little pad if you did that, to kind of look back over the time and flip back and think, oh, wow, 6 months ago, look at the words and look how they progressed and that sort of thing. It would be a fun timeline to follow if you wanted to.
It would. In fact, I just thought what would be fun for someone is you have your pad, you do the word, you do your art practice that day, take a picture of it. So then not only do you have the word, but then you have the art that you created that went with that word that day, and see over time if anything shows up.
To see that little bit of a history, that is so fun to think about. Well, let's talk about even just like physical spaces, ideas for setting up your physical space. So people live in houses, apartments, RVs, who knows? There's just so many different living environments, big, small. And so you said something earlier. You said, no matter what it is, just to find your own little space, that's your space. That's the important thing. Whether it is, all I have is this little chair in the middle of the living room, but if that is your space, you designate that as your space. Or if you have a big, beautiful, sunny studio, then that is your space. But let's talk about kind of setting up the space. What are some helpful things, at least for us, that are helpful? I know one of my first things is to have natural light.
Yes.
And so like, versus I have a basement in our house. I have room down there that I could set up, but the thought of putting a table down in that basement, I don't care what the light is, to me we have an old house. So it's an old, not a very great looking basement. I would be so depressed down there. But the fact that even if I have a little table set up in front of a window, which I do, makes all the difference when that light comes streaming in from the window when I'm sitting there stitching.
And you touched on something else that I see quite often in artists' posts on Instagram: the view out their window from their art space. That in itself can be inspiring. So I agree. It's important for me. I'm thinking about your basement going, ooh, wouldn't work for me. No. Some people they might love the cocoon feeling that the basement gives. So the first thing is, what do you like? What's important to you?
Yes.
But for you and I, a view to look to, natural light is important.
Yes. And if you don't have it, because I also get up 4:30 in the morning, so it's dark to begin with. I love the fact that I can stitch in the dark, well, with a candle and with some light. So it's not always the natural light that comes in, but it also depends on, you talked about your routine. Are you an early morning person? Or do you like to work into the night? Do you like to do your writing or your artwork or whatever all through the middle of the night? So that's going to also depend on where you do your art. And you're not going to have natural light coming in if you love working until 2 a.m. in the morning.
no, there's so many wonderful things that each one of us can do with our art environment. We just, again, have to focus on what do we like? What makes us feel good?
Yes.
The other thing in a work environment, and I see this all the time, and I go through it, organized versus messy.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I try to be organized, but I work in a very messy environment. And I've thought about that quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is what you have to know, what makes you feel good. I'm going to deviate, and I will get back to this, but I'm going to give another example with my youngest son, David. We were decorating in his backyard. He wanted to take out the grass. And he's asking me for things to do. And so I'm talking, oh, you can get these wonderful rocks that are different shapes, and and it's all wonky and eclectic. And he was quiet for a minute, and he said, we don't do wonky. Because he's organized, he's linear, he has to have things a certain way.
Yes.
I am not that way. To me, if everything is absolutely organized and has to stay in its place, it inhibits my creativity. Because my creativity comes from looking at a pile, pulling it out, letting my imagination play, and it goes, oh, I like this. Ooh, look at that. If
Right.
I had to have it in little bins all the time, I just would not work as well. But that's what works for me.
Yes.
Someone like David might need to have the paints are all over here, the brushes are here. It just, again, there's so much. You are not limited to a one size fits all. What fits you? I've
Listen to
talked
yourself.
about my wonky, messy approach that works for me. What works for you?
I think I'm a bit in the middle. I like to have things organized because when I go somewhere, don't want to be looking for 10 minutes for a piece of fabric that I've remembered. So I like to have some order, but I'm not that orderly. So it kind of just gets a little messy, and I'm okay with that to some degree, but then it'll hit me like after a month, I've got to get this place cleaned up or I'm not going to enjoy this space. Now, on the other hand, somewhat like David, I was talking to William's sister, Mary Kay, and William, my husband. They both said that when they come to do any sort of artistic endeavor, if their place is not organized, they see it as, well, I now have a chore to do to organize it. And I can't get to work in my art until it is organized, because that is going to block them. They're going to see it as a task that they need to do first. So they need to have the place organized and clean so that they can sit down and begin.
Absolutely. And if I were sitting with David, in fact, I have with David or William, and we were sitting at the same table, it would be looking at two different species practically.
Yes.
I would, I'd have things strung out all over the place, piling through things, and they would be over there very neatly doing what works for them.
Yes.
And I want to, even if you do work with accountability or an artist partner, those, you might bring different ways of working together, and that's okay. It's just what frees your creativity. Just don't obsess either way. Don't be so messy, like I get like you, where after a while I have to go, oh my God, I have to clean this up. I can't find anything, including the table. But don't get so organized that being organized becomes the excuse for not doing the art, because it can. So we have to just, again, be self-aware what works for us, and call yourself on it. If you find yourself being too much one way or the other, it's okay to call yourself on it. Say, okay, I need to be in the middle like Jill.
Do you know that French term? It's pronounced mise en place. Mise en place. I think that, excuse me if you're French listening and you're like, you just butchered that.
You just
It's called
butchered my
something like
language.
mise en place. And basically what it means, I think it's used more in the professional chef and the, restaurant business, but it means everything has its place. So that means when you're cooking something, you're going to have all your garlic chopped up in this dish. You're going to have everything over here. Everything has its place so that when you go to start executing on your art, your food, whatever that might be, you're not digging around. And especially it is important with food, because if you're then have to go cut up 7 onions and you already have the hot oil over here, it's not going to work. But I like the idea of that too, because I think a really important part of setting up a good artistic environment is to have stuff at hand that you want to use, that you are literally not going into the basement, digging through your bins to find that thing that you remember from 7 years ago. If you have things that you generally like to use, have them at hand and available and not too buried that you can't find them.
Absolutely. No, you cannot be too messy, because then you, again, just like being too organized, that keeps you from being creative.
Right.
So I'm on the messier side. David's on the more organized side. But as long as we don't get out of whack, it'll work for us.
Yes. Okay, so also I wanted to talk about, so maybe you have a whole room set up, you have space, so do I at our house, but if you don't, one thing at my last house, I didn't really feel like I had a complete place, and this was more for my reading time in the morning and that sort of thing, but I put together a basket that had a candle in it. It had my books, it had my writing, when I was writing poetry and that kind of stuff, it had all my little stuff tucked in a little basket that I could cart around if I wanted to sit in that chair, if I want to go sit on the couch. But I had my supplies in my little basket ready to go, so my routine could happen, and I had everything in its place and ready to go. So I wasn't running around like, where's my favorite pencil to write poetry or whatever. It was all right there. And when you have a little basket of something, if you don't have a big space, or you just don't choose to take up a room or a little corner of a room for your place, to have that, you can slide that under a chair, you can slide it in a closet, whatever, but you can, like, if you're a painter or stitcher, like stitching doesn't take much space in general. So I can cart stuff around in a little container if I need to. But the important thing again is just to set something in place so that you do your art and you're not hindered.
Absolutely. And in fact, when I was doing beading, I had like a tray.
Yes.
And I had a box with extra supplies beside me, and everything was on the tray. So I was a portable artist at that time. I could take that tray outside. I could sit on the couch and watch TV. I could go into the back bedroom. So again, whatever it is, you can be self-contained within that basket, which I love that idea, because your basket also included your ritual items.
Yes.
And it again, we keep going back to this, but it's true. What is it that you need? Don't let the lack of a studio, and trust me, my little green jealousy envy horns come out when I see some of the beautiful rustic studios that people on Instagram have. I'm zigging, drooling because I want one. But don't let that lack of one deter you from doing your art. Figure out how much space can I have in my small apartment? Well, I can sit on my couch and I can take these things with me, like you said, organized in a basket. And you can do art in any space. If you take your ritual things, your candle, your spray, your rock, whatever, you're still signifying this is my sacred space. Yes. No matter what it is physically, you've delineated that around you as your sacred creative space.
Yes. And we talked about traveling with art supplies, but that's another thing, like having a space. When I take a road trip, I like to have my little space. So I bring a little stuff that I could sit in the front seat and do the work. So it's like you're having a remote art space as well, just even in a car, or if you take a train to work or something, if you have to commute every day and you are able to do whatever it is that you like to do for your art, figure out a way that you can take that with you as well. Cause that's, especially if you're a commuter or you take trips, long trips or whatever, that's a great time to have. Don't let that be that you don't have an art space, that it just make your art space wherever you go.
That's right. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. Well, good. Anything else to add to this, Mama Judy, before we jump off?
Not really, just in summarizing, it is nice to make some kind of personal ritual and have some objects around you that you can carry anywhere. They don't have to be complicated. Routine is good up to a certain point. When you do it so much that you're not growing as an artist, that's when you need to reevaluate your routines. But routines and rituals are very important, I think, to any type of creative practice on the road or in your normal space. Let's just call it that. And
Right.
you can have that space anywhere.
And one thing I think we didn't really quite address this, but about the spaces, I think it's important that the space feels comfortable to you, even if it's putting a cushion on your chair or something, so that that feels better to you, or you have a little blanket that you can throw over your legs or something. Like, I like to feel kind of cozy when I'm doing my stuff, and it doesn't take much. Again, it could just be a throw, a blanket, whatever, a little space heater if it's cold in the winter, that sort of thing. Being comfortable, so having a comfortable chair to sit in, I think, is important if you sit down doing your art. And then the other thing you mentioned, music. One thing that I have found is I like to work in silence as well. So again, it's what you like, but also white noise. If you, and you can get white noise on Spotify or on YouTube or whatever, where sometimes I'll just turn on white noise and like certain decibels there've been studies that you can have certain decibels of this ambient noise, even at a coffee shop. Sometimes if it's not too loud and clackery, it's something that it's kind of just going on in the background, and it puts you into this creative mode. But I just want to throw that out as another example of an idea, if anybody hasn't thought about that, the white noise.
That's a perfect example of something good. And I'll even bring you an example from history. I believe it was Beethoven, who always had his wife read aloud to him while he was playing or composing. Because what white noise, or like when I used to bead in front of a television, my conscious mind is paying attention to that noise, whether it's the white noise or the television or the wife reading. Therefore, my subconscious creative mind is let go even more.
It's like putting you into a meditative state.
It is a meditative, and anything that, because otherwise you're going to sit there and go, oh, I don't like this, or I don't like that. Oh, that doesn't look good. That's the voice you want to figure out what will work in your creative space to silence that voice and allow that deeper subconscious creative voice to come out through your art, through your hands.
Ooh, and I love that little piece of history too about Beethoven, like the fact that she sat there and interesting. Wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall during that? If you're thinking, is the woman feeling really great about just reading, or is she falling asleep? And he's like, come on, keep reading.
I know. To me, it was just a wonderful piece to show that, everybody figures out what works for them to create their best.
Okay, one other historical example, who's from North Carolina, Winston-Salem, Maya Angelou, wonderful writer, poet, writer. She would, when she had to go do some serious writing, she would rent a hotel room for, I think it was like a week, or I don't know if it was a week or 3 weeks or whatever, for a few days, but she would go there specifically to a hotel room so that she could have her space. She created this environment. I wonder if she had like a candle or something, but I've heard that she would get a very simple hotel room so that it was like, there's a bed and there's a desk. This is what you're here for. You've set the tone for, you're stepping into this place and now you're about to do your art. Let's get to business here.
And that's what the ritual will do too. I think that's great, because look what she's also done. She's gotten rid of all outside distractions. So that's what the white noise, that's what the television in the background, all of those things will will occupy the conscious mind, which is very distracting to the creative mind.
Yes.
And the other thing that you talked about, meditating, if you can learn while you're doing your art to incorporate the breathing, the background meditative music or what, that can be part of your ritual. And I think we already said that in a different way, but
Right.
it all goes into the goal is to always do some form of art every day. I don't care if it's for 2 minutes,
Mhm.
and to figure out what works for your creative intuition to do its best work.
There you go. There's the wisdom. You've been just dropping these wisdom pearls left and right, Mama Judy.
All righty then, just call me Pearl.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. We're so grateful for
Yes.
you. And we would love to hear from you. So again, share on Instagram with us or email us if you have any ideas that you'd love to hear us chat about, or please share this with a friend, and we appreciate you listening. But love you, Mama Judy.
Love you too. And Jill, to all our listeners, they in turn, the feedback we get is very inspirational to us.
Yes, it has been very inspirational.
So we'll talk to everyone soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Love you.
Love you. Bye.
Bye-bye.